Mara, and I want to welcome you to Adventures in Creating, the place where I can take you on an adventure to create something hopefully awesome. Today we are going to be making cinnamon buns, and they are delicious. Oh, is there anything better than a warm cinnamon bun you take a bite of? You get that sweet, gooey sensation of the glaze in your mouth as the bun melts away into sweet bliss. That's what we're making today. And we're going to try and decorate it a little Halloweeny so you can use it for your family. If you're doing some sort of a get together, you can feel good about yourself. And worst case scenario, if you're not an amazing artist, I certainly am not, that's okay because the taste will make up for anything that doesn't look perfect. A little bit of a warning, so to speak, before we go on this adventure. This is a longer recipe. I tell you that because if you want to do it in one full go, you will need about 3 to 4 hours. You can break it up. You can do the first section and then let it rest and then come back to it the next day. So there are ways to do that. But overall it is longer because we are working with yeast, which means that whenever you work with yeast, you need to let things rise and rest. So it's not 3.5, 4 hours of work nonstop. Don't be frightened. Don't let that stop you. No, it's about 3.5, 4 hours in total. Most of the time is not touching your recipe at all. But if you stick through and do make this, trust me, it's worth it. You will love eating every bite. So without further ado, let's go on our adventure. In order to make today's recipe, you will need all the ingredients seen here. There are a lot of them, but that's okay. It is well worth it. So of the ingredients, you will need flour and sugar, just all-purpose flour, granulated sugar. You're also going to need powdered sugar or confectioner sugar and brown sugar. You will need butter. You will need cream cheese, some salt. You'll need some vanilla flavoring, cinnamon, eggs, and I recommend having rapid rise yeast. If you don't have rapid rise or fast-acting yeast, you could use another kind of yeast, but I am going to be using rapid rise. You're also going to want some milk, and I recommend using whole milk. You could use something like skim or 1% if you prefer, but I feel like the fat in the milk helps the glaze come together better. And you're also going to need some coffee, some brewed coffee. I like to add coffee whenever I make a frosting because I feel as though it cuts down on some of the sweetness. Otherwise, for me, it's a little too cloying usually, so that's why I use some coffee in mine. Then you're going to also need, of course, some measuring spoons, measuring cups. You will want a serrated knife. I happen to have a serrated knife here. Haha. It just looks like a watermelon because I like that. And you'll also need a spatula and a whisk. Some food coloring. This is because we're going to turn our delicious cinnamon buns into a decorative scene. Don't worry, it's not complicated. We are going to be doing a spider web, which I think you will really like because it's going to be great for Halloween, and this is a dessert or breakfast item or brunch item, if you will, that it's so worth the time to make. I will also mention that even though our video will not encompass the entire length of what it takes to make these, so by that I mean we'll still have the video where I show you all the steps, but it's not going to be the full total time because the time to make these is going to be about 3.5, 4 hours. Just as a heads up, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start adding the ingredients. I did forget to mention you will need a mixer for this recipe. This is one I don't recommend mixing by hand just because it is going to be a little harder on your hands. And when you're using your mixer today, we're going to want this sort of claw here. This is called a dough hook. Now we're going to start and add the ingredients. I am actually going to add my ingredients by weight. This is optional. You can just use your measuring cups and measuring spoons. I've set my scale to ounces, and I'm going to get started with that. I'll show you how I would measure it with cups and spoons as well though too. So don't worry, you can still make this even if you don't have a scale. The reason I like to use a kitchen scale is because it helps me be consistent every single time. Flour in particular is a food item that, because it can kind of absorb moisture, if you have a particularly humid day, it's going to be much denser than it would be on a day that's extremely dry. So you can get more flour per cup than you would normally on that humid day. But again, this is just an option. You do not have to do it this way. I will show you but measuring by cups as well. So I'm going to take my flour, and I need 4.25 cups. So I'm going to take out my flour, and something that's very important with flour is that when you, there you go, you can see, when you get a scoop of that, that is not a cup of flour. So what I am going to actually do is I'm going to scrape this off. Normally you would scrape this right back into your flour container. However, since I'm also measuring by weight, I'm going to scrape this into my bowl because I know I'm going to need all of it. And if you do intend to do this by weight, the amount of flour you will need, and remember this is all-purpose flour, is 21.25 ounces. So here you can see I have a nice level cup. So either 4.25 or 21.25 ounces. And you place that right into your container. So that was 1 cup. And you can see I am at 8.14 ounces. And I'm going to scoop some more. Same thing. This would have to be a level scoop in order for it to count as a proper cup. So I scrape some of that off. And this is not perfectly level because there's some dips and gaps in there, which there you can see. But I'm still going to use it for now. I'm at 13.56 ounces. Going to scoop again. Same thing. Scraping off. I'm at 14. Aha! Now, as far as by weight, I am at 20.42. That was only about 3 cups so far. So this is why I say you can do it by weight. If you don't have it by weight, do everything by the cups and measuring spoons. You will still be fine. So since I'm at 21.42, I'm pretty close to the amount I need. So I'm just scooping out a little bit, and I'm sprinkling it in slowly. So I'm at 21.18, 21.22. There we go, 21.28. Slightly heavier on the flour, that's okay. 2 cornstarch. The recipe calls for half a cup, so I have a half cup measure. My measuring spoons are mixed just because you don't have to have a matching set. Or if you're going to do this by weight, you need 2 ounces. So I'm going to reset that. Why is the weight so different than the flour? Because it's a much lighter ingredient. And I'm just going to put some in. And now I will also show you a special note. This is a white fluffy ingredient similar to flour. Be sure to not mix up your cornstarch and flour. You will taste the difference. So I'm just putting it in, and I'm actually going to just shake this in because I know I need 2 ounces, which again is a little bit of a lot, but it's necessary to help avoid sticking. So I'm at 1.88. I'm going to need to get just a little bit more to get to our 2 ounces. So I finished adding my cornstarch. Now I'm going to take my yeast. When you buy yeast, it often comes in packets of 3. You will then just want to cut between the packets. You need to make sure that you cut the part that's been glued down, that's flat, and not the part that has air and the little bits of yeast in it. Reason being, if you cut down here, you're going to cause the yeast to spill out. But I'm going to take one of my packets and just cut along the corner. Now I have it, it's ready to pour in. And our recipe calls for 2¼ teaspoons of the rapid rise yeast. So you'll take your teaspoon, measuring spoon. If you're not very comfortable using measuring spoons, if you have a set like I do where there's about 4 spoons on here, the teaspoon is usually the second largest one. The largest is a tablespoon. We do not want that. Otherwise, your bread will rise quite a huge amount and then collapse in on itself because it does not have the support of its other ingredients. But we want the teaspoon that is going to be the second largest one. So 2¼ which I believe most packets are actually close to that amount. So I just pour this in. And before I fill that up, you can see yeast here, it's a brownish little granule. It is actually a live bacteria, but don't let that frighten you. It's okay, it's a good thing. We want it to be alive because it's going to make our dough rise. So here's 1 teaspoon. I'm going to put that in. And putting in another, which we'll see actually, this packet, oh, there we go, we have our 2. Now I need 1/4 teaspoon, which that is often the smallest spoon on your measuring spoons. And I will just simply add that in. And like I said, I'm pretty sure most packets are usually about 2¼ So if you don't have your measuring spoons handy, which you will need for this recipe, you can always just use 1 full packet. And remember, more is not necessarily better. If you are measuring your yeast out of perhaps, say, a large container, don't just go heavy on your teaspoons and all of that because, like I said, your dough might puff up, but it might not support itself. So there we go. We have our mixture ready to go. I'm going to set my scale and a few of my items aside, and then we will, before I do that, actually, we need to measure out our salt. For our salt, we are going to need, moving my scale out of the way, we are going to need 1¼ or 1½ teaspoons. So here is my salt, 1, putting that in, and taking my half, which if you're not sure what a ½ teaspoon is, remember your fractions from grade school, where you have 1/2. That is your half, and putting that in. I'm going to set aside a few items, clean up my area, and I'll show you the next part. Now that we've added these dry ingredients all together, you're going to take your whisk and just whisk the ingredients together. The reason you're doing this is you want the yeast, the flour, the cornstarch, and salt to be evenly distributed, so when we add the wet ingredients, it all activates together. If you just have the yeast on top, it's going to be harder for it to permeate through the other ingredients. So for our purposes, we want to whisk this all together so that when we add the next step, this will be ready to go. And it doesn't take long. A few seconds, it's all whisked because these ingredients are very light and fluffy. I'm going to put my mixing bowl onto my mixer, which I do have a KitchenAid. I'm going to lift the camera. Please don't get sick. Oh, there we go. All right. Now I'm going to add this right onto my bowl, onto my mixer. You line it up with the grooves and make sure it is locked into place. Otherwise, once it starts mixing, the bowl could go all over. Then you're taking your dough hook and placing that up on top. We'll be using this in a moment. Now we need to get together our wet ingredients and the sugar. I'm going to show you now adding the wet ingredients. You're going to take your eggs and you're going to crack them into, if you have a large measuring cup, so in other words, not just your standard 2-cup one, but a larger one, so probably about a 4-cup measuring cup. Feel free to crack your eggs into that and add your milk and your sugar all there. Reason being, you're going to be pouring this into the mixer. And if you can save a step of not using another bowl, great. But if you do not have a larger measuring cup, that is okay. You can instead just use another bowl to mix it in. I recommend cracking the eggs first. Reason being, you can sometimes get shell into your eggs, which we don't want that, not good. Or occasionally your eggs can be a little funny. Not very common, but it can sometimes happen. So I am going to crack my eggs into here. To crack the eggs, it's not too difficult. You're just going to go bang, tap, 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 and here you can see you've got a little bit of a depression in the eggshell. Stick both thumbs in there and pull the eggshell apart. Voila! And we cracked an egg. And I always scoop out all the other goo in there. So, and then set your eggshell to the side. It is something everyone should learn and everyone can learn. If you don't want to do the two-hand method, there is the one-hand method. Crack. And basically, same thing. You're finding that depression and you're going to put your first finger and thumb in there and pull the egg apart one-handed. Both methods of cracking an egg are great and easy. The two thumbs in the center is, I think, a little bit easier. So if you're uncomfortable with cracking an egg, do that one first. Move up to adding the other one. And then if you get really crazy, you can practice using both of your hands. Haha. Which that is something I only recommend if you're really bored and practicing baking and cooking quite a lot. So here inside you can see I've got 3 eggs. Beautiful, 3 egg yolks. I'm going to set my measuring cup back on the scale because I am going to be using this to measure milk and sugar by weight. So I turn my scale on, make sure it's zeroed and on the ounces setting. Again, if you don't have a kitchen scale, you can use your measuring cup. We are going to need, I think it is 3/4, yes, 3/4 of a cup of milk. So you can just add this in. You go right straight to the line. You want to make sure you're evenly at the line when you're looking at, not when you're looking at above, but when you are getting down and looking right next to it. I'm going to measure this in. It's also 6 ounces that I need. So I'm measuring, almost there. All right, so 3/4 of a cup for me was slightly under 6 ounces. So I'm going to add just a little bit more until I hit, now I'm a little heavy. It's okay. We will survive. I try and be close with the ingredients. A little heavy this time. Oh well. So now moving on to the sugar. The sugar, we are going to need 1/2 cup of sugar. So I'm taking my measuring cup and zeroing that out so that I can make sure I add that in correctly. And it's also 3.5 ounces of granulated sugar. Why is this dough so sweet? Well, because we're making cinnamon buns, and who doesn't want a sweet cinnamon bun? So sugar does not have to be as careful as with flour with your measuring cup. You still want it to be flat and even, but you don't have to scrape the top when adding sugar. And I'm just going to sprinkle that in. So right now I'm at 3.62. That was slightly less than a full 1/2 cup. So here we have our wet ingredients all together. Yay, they are great. What we're going to do now is just whisk them together. How do we whisk? You take this little item here, the whisk, put it in, and you're going to stir until these ingredients are combined. And also, you want the sugar to be dissolved. What does that mean? That means that when your whisk is going around the bottom, it's not grabbing on any little hard bits. Those hard bits are the sugar. Once they are dissolved, and they will dissolve with consistent whisking, then we will be ready to move on to the next step. I am still in the process of whisking my egg, milk, and sugar mixture. But I wanted to show you, you can see how there's different colors in the egg and mixture. That means it is not yet fully mixed. You want to keep whisking it until they're all the same color. It's all one mixture. So I will meet you back when I finish that. So now you can see my mixture is pretty much all one color. It's all cohesive. So I am going to actually put this into our mixer and we're going to turn it on in just a moment. I'm going to turn my mixer on to a low speed. Make sure your mixer is also in the locked position so you can't get it apart. You will want to have your spatula ready because you might need to scrape down the sides. So I apologize, this will get a little louder with the background noise of the mixer going. but I want to show you what I am doing. So I turned it on, it's going at a nice low speed. I'm going to carefully and slowly pour in my liquids. I do this carefully, I do this slowly, because if I pour this in fast, it has the possibility of splashing back at me, as well as causing the flour and yeast to all puff up. And if I'm not careful, this could get caught with the motor that is going. I don't want that to happen. Similarly, I don't want to lean over, and if I have long hair, I want to tie it back. Not just for some mild sanitary reasons, your hair is less likely to fall out into your food if it's tied back and out of your way, but if you have nice long hair, it is easy to get it caught in your mixer. So make sure you don't do that. Don't lean over it as you go. So we're going to let this mix, and it's going to take about 2 minutes. We're going to let it mix until it comes to a nice ball, a nice cohesive shape. I will meet you back when mine starts to look like that so you can see what it looks like, but there's no reason for us to hang around for just 2 minutes waiting. My dough is starting to get there. It's still a bit on the crumbly side, but it is starting to come together. While that is coming together, you will want to take your butter, and we are going to be adding this about a tablespoon at a time. It works best if your butter is softened by leaving it out to sit and warm up to your room temperature. And as I've mentioned in another video, if you're not very familiar with using butter, you can measure out the tablespoons just on the side. They have them marked off for you, which is great. Very helpful. Now you can see my dough is very nearly there. I'm just going to give it about a minute more, and once that is finally mixed and stirred and come together as a dough ball to the extent that I want, I will meet you back and we will start adding our butter. My machine is starting to struggle a little bit, which tells me that this is almost ready. And as you can see, it is starting to look like a nice round lump. And the little dry floury bits at the bottom, they are all but non-existent. Which actually, I will pause this and show you how it is coming together. And I had it stuck on there really well. So you can see it's all together. There's hardly any little crumbly bits left. We are going to now put this back on, making sure everything is secured correctly. And we're going to turn this up a couple of clicks so it's on medium speed. We will be taking our butter, and we are going to need 12 tablespoons. Each stick is 8 tablespoons, so you're going to need more than one stick. And add it just roughly about a tablespoon at a time. Again, still exercising caution. You're going to want the tablespoons to be incorporated in before you go on and add too much at a time. And if you feel like your machine is going too fast, turn it down a click. It's not a hardship. You do want to exercise caution because you are adding something into a moving machine. And this is going to take just a few minutes. Already, with just adding about 3 tablespoons, you can see that my mixture, it is changing how it is looking. And it's going a little crazy. I'm going to stop this. And because this is getting a little messy, I am going to scrape the sides, scrape the top of our lovely dough hook. Of which, if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a KitchenAid mixer, this is actually one of the very first items I bought on my own when I moved out, because I knew I was still going to want to be able to cook and bake with this, because this is a great item. It's well worth the price to invest in one. I'm not being sponsored by them, but oh goodness, if I was, that would be a happy day. Their products are very nice. So I scrape down the sides, and while I have this stopped, I'm actually going to add in just another tablespoon of this, and I'm going to turn our machine back on, making sure it's locked, and get it going. I will continue to add tablespoons until we have the full 12 in. I'll meet you up when I'm adding the last. Now our dough is ready. I'm going to add in the last tablespoon of butter. This is making the dough a very rich, a very creamy and decadent dough. But as you can see in here, we have our dough is coming together nicely. It's looking a lot thicker. It's no longer looking like the big, huge dough ball that it was a moment ago. I am going to continue to mix this on a medium speed for the next 3 minutes. Why am I doing this? Because this is going to help develop the bonds between all the ingredients. It's going to build some structure into our dough, which we do want that. So I'm going to finish mixing in my lump of butter. It's right there. And after I finish mixing that in, I'm going to then let this continue to mix, knead, if you will, for 3 minutes. I will meet you back after I do that. Now that I have finished mixing my dough, you can see here it is a gooey mess, and that's okay. I like to test it by just pulling it up a little. It should stretch some. If it's not stretching, then you need to mix it some more. But if it's willing to stretch a little, great. And as long as your fingers are not coated completely by the time you pull it off. Next step, I highly recommend if you have any rings on to remove them, because we are going to hand knead the flour. We are going to hand knead the dough. So what you will also do is you'll take some of your all-purpose flour and you're going to sprinkle it right on top of your countertop. Just as a sanitary note, please make sure your countertops are clean. You don't want to be picking up who knows what. Dog hair, cat hair, leftover food bits into your dough. That would not taste very good. So then we are going to take this and we're going to dump this right on out onto our floured surface. And you might need to scrape it, use your fingers. Don't be afraid to get messy, because we're going to be making this whole thing a messy thing. We're going to be using our hands. So I'm going to get this all scraped out, because I will need both hands, and I will be back to show you how we're going to knead this. Now I have my dough out. I'm actually going to get my hands just a little floury. You don't want it to be too much, but I'm just going to rub it on. Why am I doing this? Because this is going to help keep the dough from sticking to my fingers. There's several ways to knead. Lots of different options and variations. For our purposes, we're going to go with what I always learned was just a basic standard way of kneading. We'll look at some other kneading techniques in the future. Don't worry, because for me, I personally love making bread and other dough type products. I don't do it too often because I do try and watch my waistline. This, though, is definitely a dessert that is worth the calories. Oh my goodness. So for kneading, basically you're going to grab from the back of your dough or the side, whichever is going to be more comfortable, but mostly the back. You pull it a little bit, so you're giving a little stretch. You lift it up, and you're making this sort of fold. Once you have this folded on top of itself, you push down. Pick up, turn, we do it again. This time it will be a little bit nicer because our dough is now in a bit of a cylinder. Not a perfect one, obviously. But same thing, lift, pull, push down on top of each other. You can see that very nice fold happening. And push. And put your whole weight on it. You want to actually do some serious pushing. And pick it up. And we will repeat this over and over. We're going to be twisting, lift up, stretch, push. And you'll just keep going. You will do this not very long, 30 seconds to a minute, just until we start getting a very nice shaped ball of dough. And you can see my dough is definitely coming together. If you start doing this and you find that your dough is extremely sticky, so it just seems to be kind of turning into a gooey mess, you probably should have mixed it longer, but don't despair, we can work with it. Easiest answer, add a little bit more flour right on top of your kneading portion and just knead it in. It will eventually come together. Other hand, if your dough is extremely dry, so you're just having a hard time getting this to work because it's falling apart, it's crumbling, you certainly need more liquid in that. I would recommend the easiest thing would be to try and fold in some more of your butter that is nice and soft and get that worked in. That's going to add nice oil, nice suppleness to your dough. You want this to be a very nice rich dough. And after you've kneaded this several times, it should be a nice ball, like I said, coming together. And you can see mine is definitely taking shape. When you push down on this, you do want to definitely put some weight into it because that is going to just help stretch. Basically, whenever you're making a bread or other dough type ingredient, the best way to get it to be amazing is you want to be stretching it. Different doughs obviously have different amounts of stretching and different percentages and variances. I'm not going to go into all of that today. So now I have a nice, lovely round ball of dough. Yay! This is going to be ready to rise. So what I need to do is I need to get a bowl and coat it with oil. I'll meet you right back as I do that. So I have my bowl here. I could use any oil I want, but I have my butter wrapper that I just used to get the butter into there. I'm actually going to put that in here and just rub it around. Why am I doing this? Well, quite frankly, it just helps me not waste the butter that's remaining on the wrapper, because I don't need a huge amount of oil, just little bits to coat this so that my dough as it rises does not stick like mad to this bowl. So then I set my wrapper to the side again, and I pick up my lovely bread ball, my bread dough, and you're kind of going to gather the one side. So the seam side, you want that to go down at the bottom. Aha. All right, that is in the bowl. We are now going to just let that rest, and we're going to cover the container with plastic wrap. I should have mentioned before we needed it. Now I'm telling you, we are going to cover this with plastic wrap, and you're going to also want the plastic wrap to have a little bit of oil coating on it, just so the dough as it rises does not stick to that. I'll show you this covered in just a moment. I've covered our dough ball. We are going to let this sit and rise for about 2 to 2.5 hours. Now, you want to make sure it's covered tightly with plastic wrap, and you're also going to want to make sure this is in a warm place in your home. Now, you do not have to bake this or put it in the oven. Just feel free to, as long as your home is about 70 degrees or higher, it should be fine just out on the counter. You're just going to want to make sure it's not directly under a fan or directly under an air conditioning vent if you're running that. If you're running the heater, it can be under that. If your house tends to get a lot of cold spots and it's inconsistent in temperature, or it's on the cooler side, which personally I prefer, but if it tends to be like that where it's going to be below 70 degrees, the best solution is turn your oven on to about 200 or 100, or if you have a warm setting, let that warm up for a few minutes. Make sure it's nice and toasty in there, and then turn the oven off, pop this in. What this will do is the heat helps the yeast to grow and it helps it essentially have gas so that the yeast will expand by pushing out air bubbles. So 2.5 hours, let this sit. Don't touch it, just leave it alone. Go eat breakfast, eat supper, whatever you're doing. Go do some housework. That's what I will be doing. And I'll meet you back and we will see how fabulous this looks. My dough is just about fully risen. So now I have my pan. This is a 13 by 9, just average cake pan. And you're going to need to line it with some aluminum foil. Now I'm going to tear some off. I apologize if this gets loud. You're going to want 2 sheets. Put it down and just smush it so it goes out to the corners and the edges. I apologize, this is crinkly. And in fact, because it's so loud, I'm going to just line the other half with another sheet of this. Once that's done, I'll show you what this looks like. Now that I have this lined, I'm going to spray this with just some vegetable oil. Of course, you could use some butter if you prefer to use that. So I'm spraying that. And just always be aware when you spray with oil, like using a cooking spray, just try to do this over a sink or a counter area so it does not get on the floor, because it's very easy to fall when the surface is slick. So now our pan is nicely oiled and foiled. Haha. I'm going to set this to the side, and we are going to mix together the delicious cinnamon sugar filling for our cinnamon buns. Now I'm going to mix together my filling. I have the weights written down, but I will also show you a little bit of what it would mean to measure with a cup or different measurements. We will need our measuring spoons again, and also a cup measure. If you do not have that available, use your kitchen scale, which will give you a slightly more accurate. Now I'm going to use my 1/4 teaspoon, and that is going to be the smallest spoon on your set of measuring spoons. And I'm going to just put a 1/4 teaspoon of salt into my bowl. And this, you might be wondering, why on earth are we adding salt into something that's supposed to be a sweet filling? Reason being is salt is going to help enliven the flavors. It draws out the delicious flavors and makes it taste more of itself, if you will. Now putting the salt right in, setting that to the side. Now we need our ground cinnamon. Very important. Cinnamon buns should be full of cinnamon. So I am opening up my cinnamon. We are going to be using 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon. And I'm having a hard time opening this. Just goes to show you, happens to the best of us. Now I have my cinnamon. I'm going to dump out about 2 tablespoons. My actual recipe calls for 1.5 tablespoons, but I'll be honest, I like it heavy on the cinnamon. So I'm measuring that out just right into our spoons, and I apologize, I'm blocking it from view here, and I'm making it heavy. Put that in. Wonderful, delicious. Everyone likes cinnamon on a cinnamon bun. Setting that to the side. Now we're going to need brown sugar. I have some here. When we are measuring out brown sugar in a container, such as in a cup measure, there is a particular way to do that. And that is by packing it in. What does that mean? What does it mean to pack it down? I found the easiest way is I literally put my scoop right into my bag and push it in. You want the sugar to be packed down hard. So if you dump it out, I'll try and show this, it holds its shape, even though that was fast. You can see we do have the shape of the cinnamon, at least before it started to fall apart. I am going to measure mine by weight. And part of this is because I do not think I have enough of my brown sugar left over to make this. So my recipe calls for 10.5 ounces of the brown sugar, or 1.5 cups packed. So I have my scale on, set to ounces. I'm going to see how much I have left in my brown sugar. And true to form, I do not have enough. I only have about just under 5.5. So what I'm going to do to make up the difference is I'm going to make brown sugar. I'm going to use some white sugar. I'm going to add this to where it gets to about 9 ounces. And this is a handy dandy thing. If you are ever using a recipe that calls for brown sugar and you don't have any, but you have regular sugar, you can make brown sugar if you happen to also have molasses on hand. Now I realize molasses is kind of a niche item that some people don't regularly have on hand. I, however, really like the deep, rich flavor of molasses. It's, I think, delicious and pairs well with a lot of different things. I'm going to measure in about 2 spoonfuls of molasses. I'm just using a regular spoon that I have that I would normally use to eat with. I'm going to spray this with some cooking spray, some cooking oil, because molasses, it's similar to honey in the fact that it's very, very sticky, and it will stick to whatever I use. So I oiled my spoon. Reason I did that, I grab a spoonful and it slides right off the spoon. Beautiful. I'm going to take another spoonful because I want that rich flavor. And there we go. 2 spoonfuls in there because I was short on my brown sugar. And that is what we get. That's how we make that. Now these ingredients in here, we are going to stir all together. And actually, I'm just going to use my molasses spoon to stir them all together, because why make something else dirty when I don't need to? And you can see my ingredients are coming together. They will obviously be a little bit drier if you have adequate amounts of brown sugar. Trust me, that's an easier route to go. No harm in doing that. I am just showing you because I was out of brown sugar, just about, what I do when I am in a pinch. The molasses is what causes the brown sugar to be brown anyways. So I'm just stirring, trying to keep the sugar in the bowl, unlike me who just splashed some out, because when the sugar gets on the ground, it's very crunchy under your feet and is very irritating. If you're not sure if you have the right ratios of ingredients, you can, of course, taste your filling. However, I'd recommend just waiting until it's all together. It'll look nice and brown like this because we've got the cinnamon, the brown sugar, it's stirring together. It's going to be delicious. And once it looks like it's pretty well mixed, you can set that to a side, and we are going to go get our dough that has been rising. For me, it's been just over 2 hours, so we're going to check it out and see where we're at. So here is our beautiful dough. It has risen and it has about doubled in size. If you are not happy with how much your dough has risen, so you want it to be higher, let it sit longer. If you think after an hour it's already doubled in size, maybe even tripled, because I have had that on certain hot, humid days, pull it out. It's ready to work with. So I'm going to smush that down. It deflates a little bit. It feels nice. It's warm. It's been happy. It's been resting. We are going to flour our counter surface as best as we can. Just a light flouring here. And just making sure that that's there. Reason we put that there is because we want the dough to stick to flour rather than to our surface that we are working on. And we are just going to plop our beautiful dough right onto our floured surface. Oh, and it looks so great. And it smells good too. I love working with dough. It is wonderful. So now we are going to want to press and roll. So if you have a rolling pin, this is a great time to use it. So you can roll out the sides and edges. However, maybe you don't have a rolling pin, because in this day and age, there's a lot of us that don't. There are things you can do instead of using a rolling pin, and that includes things like get a bowl. It won't be perfectly even, but you can certainly use your bowl, especially if you have a mixer, to help roll your dough out. It flattens it out. You'll have to use your fingers, of course, to make it a little more even, but this is certainly something you can use in a pinch. Or if you happen to have a wooden dowel or a long broomstick, feel free to use that instead of a rolling pin. It will get your dough nice and flat. I'm going to grab my rolling pin and we will get rolling. So I have my dough here. I'm just going to gently roll it. I don't have to be rough. I don't have to be aggressive. There's no need. We're just going back and forth, stretching this dough so we can get kind of a square rectangle shape. The reason we want this to be mostly square is because we are going to be putting the butter and our delicious cinnamon sugar filling onto this for the next bit. Size. You want this to be a good, decent size. And the dimensions that I have written down here are, we want it to be about an 18-inch square. So I am looking at where I'm at this corner. Please be careful you don't spill all the things that you've worked on. I have done that before and it causes quite a bit of grumbling for me. So I want to save you that trouble. 18 inches. How big is 18 inches? Well, if you happen to have a ruler or measuring tape, you can see. I'm at 17 right now. If you don't, just eyeball it. You figure 18 inches, it's just under 2 feet. So you can just estimate, guesstimate, use a sheet of paper if you want to, that those are usually 8.5 by 11. Use that as a guide. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. You are just making this so it's going to be close. If you want it to be exact and perfect, I won't hold that against you. Go for it. Measurements are fine. That's why they're there as a guideline for what you're going to want it to look like. And you are going to try and want to get this sort of square shape. It will be, of course, a little bit of a blob because it's dough. It doesn't necessarily cooperate that quickly and that easily. And to me, let's see, I'll measure, see where we're at. Going right across the middle. And we're a little bit bigger. For me, we're about at 20 inches. And by 15. But for me, that's going to be okay. Like I said, I don't need this to be exactly perfect, but I followed my guidelines. I'm about where I should be. Here comes the fun part, and also a very messy part. So make sure you're at a spot where you'll be able to do this without having to stop partway through. Reason being, well, you will see. Your hands are going to get covered in all sorts of deliciousness. Yay! We're going to take the remaining butter from our 2 sticks. You're going to want this butter to be very soft. Mine has very soft. It has been sitting out for a while. I have even at times, I have done this, I have melted the butter so it's liquid. You don't have to do that. I'm using it. It's just very soft. It's been sitting. We are spreading this out as best as we can. And this is, we're going to use all of what's here. I believe it is, should be a remaining 6 tablespoons. I think it's 6 tablespoons. And yes, of course, it sounds like a lot of butter. And it is, certainly. This is not a low-fat dessert. This is not a low-sugar dessert. This is not a healthy dessert. What this is this is a delicious dessert. If you are going to, at least in my opinion, if you're going to eat the calories, you want to spend them, your carbs, your sugars, all that on foods that you think are really worth it, this is a dessert that's worth it. Don't go halfsies on a cinnamon bun. Make sure it is delicious and delightful and decadent. I'm on the D's right now. We'll figure out if we can figure out some other descriptive words in a bit. And so you are just going to spread this across. I'm going to meet you after I have finished covering this whole section with butter. And now we have our grape dough. It is covered in butter. Yay. Ready to go. We are going to take our sugar and cinnamon mixture. I apologize, it's a little dark. Probably just because it's dark browns. And we are going to just sprinkle it over top. And I'm okay if it's not perfectly spread because I will be spreading it shortly. Now I have my cinnamon buns. They're a little haphazard. That's okay. Also, you've got seams on the edge of them where the roll meets. Just pinch that together in the dough to keep it from unrolling. Make sure they're all set together nicely. So you're going to want your rolls to be like this. They are going to rise a little bit more. So it's okay if they're not smushed super tight. You do want them touching, but not where they're crushing each other in their space. We have room so they can expand and grow. So I'm going to cover this with our saran wrap, our plastic cover that we had used before. Make sure it is lightly greased because these will be rising. And we are going to let these rise for about an hour. If, however, you say, I don't have that hour right now, I need to go live my life, do something else, pop these in the refrigerator. They'll keep in this state for a good 24 hours at the most. I wouldn't go longer than that because at that point, the flour and sugars are all going to start breaking down. But they're ready basically to sit out and rise for an hour whenever you want, which could be great if you want to take them warm to an event. So maybe you are like, okay, I did this. Now I'm just going to pop them in the fridge. Tomorrow I'm going to get up, get dressed, and then we'll let these rise while I'm doing that. So these can wait. I will see you in an hour and we will move on to the next step. As you can see, my cinnamon buns have risen. It has been an hour. They have puffed up quite nicely. My plastic wrap comes up easily because I had that greased, and they are beautiful, ready to cook. Now, you will notice this one looks a little funny compared to the others, and that is because my dough was not perfectly square. If you want them all to be uniform, you will need to make sure you have a perfect square, but it will still taste good and bake just fine. Now we are going to go put these into the oven and we are going to cook them at 350 degrees for 35 to 40 minutes, just until they are nicely browned and the inside, so the sugar, cinnamon, is slightly melted. They will cook nicely. While this is going on, we are going to work on making the glaze for these. The first ingredient we will want with our glaze is cream cheese. And just like the butter, there are markings on a lot of packages of cream cheese on the foil. It's divided up into ounces. You can, of course, use the scale to weigh this out. There's no shame in that. I, however, will just be cutting on the line to make sure I have the amount recommended with the cream cheese. Now, when you're working on this, you do want this to be pre-softened. So whether you have left it out to get soft at room temperature or you're going to put it in the microwave to soften it up a little bit, either works just well. but you will want it soft so you can easily whisk this with your other ingredients for your glaze. I am going to open this up and I will be putting it in the microwave to soften it up. Now my cream cheese has been softened and it's ready to mix with the other wet ingredients. I'm adding a tablespoon of coffee, and this is my secret ingredient. I like to use this to help break up the sweetness of any icings or glazes that I make. Otherwise, they're too much for me. Add also a tablespoon of whole milk. You do want to use whole milk and not skim if you can help it. The fat just makes it taste better. Also, you're going to want a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Of course, if you prefer to use a different kind of vanilla, such as vanilla essence, or you have a vanilla bean you want to scrape out, by all means, go for it. I am just using a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now I am going to be using a fork to help break up my cream cheese. I will of course switch to a whisk once I am certain that my cream cheese is broken up and able to blend. And I apologize, it does look a little ugly, a little chunky now, but it will start to come together, especially when we start whisking. And I personally like to blend the wet ingredients together before I introduce the sugar. I do this just so that when I mix in the sugar, I will be able to mix that into one wet creation rather than 3 different wet elements. Now that we have our wet ingredients mixed together and it looks a little ugly, that's okay. We are going to be adding in our powdered sugar or confectioner sugar or 10x sugar, whatever you're used to calling it, depending on where you are from. Now this is a very light ingredient, so I am going to be adding this by weight. Of course, if you don't have a kitchen scale, you can add this using your cup measures. This calls for 1.5 cups. I need 6 ounces, so I will be putting that in. And you can see I am just over 6 ounces, and that is okay for me. It doesn't have to be perfect for the glaze. It's going on top, it's the decoration. Once your sugar is weighed out into the bowl, I am going to start whisking the ingredients together. And it will take a few minutes, not super long, but a few minutes at least of whisking. You want all of the sugar to be absorbed in, and you want to get rid of all the chunks. This is not going to be thin like water. Instead, you are going to want this to be thick like pudding. So where it will still pour and spread easily, but it's not going to spill onto the counter if you happen to tilt your bowl over. At least not spill over instantly. Please don't spill this on the counter. It is sugar and sticky and messy. You do want to get rid of the lumps, and that will just take some whisking here and there. You can see my lumps have not fully disappeared yet, so I'm just going to keep at it until they go away. So I will see you in a few minutes when that is taken care of. As you can see, my lumps have disappeared. My glaze, it's nice and thick and smooth, ready to be put onto our cinnamon buns. However, I am going to divide this into 2 bowls. The reason is I am doing 2 different colors. I will be adding food coloring into this. So first things first, I need to separate this. I will be using green and I will be using a bright pink. I also like to use the gel food colorings for my food. I just like how the colors look, and for me that's convenient, but feel free to use whatever colors or dyes that are food safe that you want. Now take your rubber spatula or whatever items you have to help you scrape out ingredients and scoop out some of the glaze. I'm putting less into my second bowl because that's going to be my secondary color for the design I'm doing, which, just as a spoiler, it's going to be a spiderweb design, or at least an attempt at that. And there you can see I have scraped out. Make sure you get all that you can off of your spatula. Now I'm taking my green and I will be putting in a little bit. I do not have an exact amount because it's honestly a little bit different for me each time. I will figure out an exact amount for you though and put it in the recipe. And I put that in, and just as much as you want. I will warn you, please don't put in an entire bottle of this. It will taste gross because you will start to taste the dye. Now take your pink or whatever second color you are using, or if you're not, feel free to skip this whole section. but I'm going to squeeze in my pink, and same thing, just as much as I feel I want. And the great thing about the food dye is you can always add more if you wish. Then you want to mix in the color. You want to make sure that you mix it in well enough so that there are no big pockets of color that haven't been mixed in. Reason being, if you bite down on that part that is not mixed in, your whole mouth will turn that color because you have just essentially dyed your mouth. No fun, trust me, I have done this. Now I'm going to mix up the green. Oh, I love that color, especially on the glaze. It, to me, is just exciting. And now I am using sort of toxic waste colors. Why? Because my family likes this. They like the bright colors. They will be excited for this. Do whatever works for your family, though. I won't judge if you don't even want to color it. But have fun. This is a great way to express yourself. Now you can see that my cinnamon buns are nicely browned, the inside is melted, they are ready to decorate. They are warm and oh, this is exciting. So I gave my first color glaze a quick stir just to make sure it was ready to go on. Now I'm taking my spatula and I am spreading the glaze on these. Right now I am individually covering each of the cinnamon buns because I do want to make sure that they all get an equal amount or at least a good amount of glaze on them. I don't want to miss any, but there's plenty. Trust me, we won't miss any. So as you can see, like I said, just covering each one individually. Now that I've covered each one individually, I am going to go back with the rest of the pink glaze that I am using and just go in between them. Reason being, I don't want to waste this, and it just adds to the gooey sweetness of it. And this also brings me back to why we lined our pan with tinfoil. This saves up on us on cleanup quite a bit. Now instead of scraping a pan of leftover cooked cinnamon and sugar, you just pull the tinfoil out in one swift go and voila, you are done. And you can see now that I have just about fully covered my cinnamon buns in the glaze. I'm switching over to my green glaze, which is my secondary glaze. I put this in a Ziploc bag, just any old Ziploc bag. Well, at least it's clean, trust me. I'm doing that. But you could, of course, put this in an icing bag or frosting bag, or you could make your own with parchment paper, and that would be perfectly fine. I found it's easy enough just to put it in a Ziploc bag. And I'm going to snip off the one corner at the bottom. Make sure you hold this upright though, because even though this is thick, it does still run and you don't want it all over. And you can see I dropped a little piece on my cinnamon buns. I just made sure I pulled that out so we don't have any non-edible things in them. Now you're ready to squeeze out a design. And as I mentioned, I am going for a spider web look. I will be the first to tell you I am not a perfect artist. I have a lot of creative ideas, but they don't always look beautiful. I am going for a design, though, that will be recognizable and, quite frankly, will be delightful for my family to eat. And that is my main goal. I want you to feel confident in your abilities to make a dish that not only could you feel proud to present to your family because they will love it, you could even share this with your friends. And as long as they taste it, they are not going to care if it doesn't look like the perfect design. But who knows? You might find that you're an amazing food artist. It happens every day. And I did the first part of my design. I still have a little bit of glaze left, so I will go through and add that until I get all, or at least almost all, of my glaze out, because we want to enjoy the full extent of our work. Thank you so much for watching. I had fun on this adventure. I hope you did as well. I also hope you made a delicious batch of cinnamon buns to eat and share with your family, or just eat by yourself and don't tell anyone. I know I sure won't. Either way, you should have something delicious that is like this. Oh, I can't wait to dig into this with a nice cup of coffee. Exactly what I need, so to speak. This is a great recipe because it is a delicious one. It's not particularly difficult, but there are several steps and it does take a little bit of time. But if you stick through, you can feel extremely accomplished because you made something that required working with yeast, that required baking and mixing and lots of moving parts, and the taste is well worth it. if you are interested in other recipes like this one, I took this recipe, modified it slightly, but the basis was from the book that you can see back there, Bread Illustrated. I will leave a link for that down below, and also a link for some of my other items that I used in the recipe, such as my mixer and those sorts of things, if you wanted to get the same items I had. But either way, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoy your cinnamon bun. I know I will. And decorate it however you want, whether you're doing funky toxic waste colors like me, or if you're doing something more traditional, just like a white glaze or slightly off-white glaze, or going with the Halloween theme and doing a black glaze to make it a little mysterious. Whatever you do, whatever your flavor, whatever your choice, I hope you enjoy this adventure and that you come back next week, same time, same place, to go on another adventure. And remember, all of October, it's going to be Halloween-esque type adventures, whether crafts or recipes. Don't forget, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and either hit a like or dislike, and let me know what you liked about this, what you would like to see differently, more of, less of, and all of that. I look forward to seeing you next week for our next adventure. Until then, bye.